Hi guys. So I'm going to be talking today about the research that I'm currently in the works of creating. So it's kind of a tentative thing that's going on, creating stimuli, and so it's really nice that I'm able to talk to get feedback that you guys might have or suggestions. So my topic is on emotion perception of music, speech, and faces in autism. And the main question that I'm working with is, are individuals with autism spectrum conditions, so there's a broad range of autism, better at recognizing emotions in music than compared to in speech and faces? Got it. So to investigate this question, you have to think about what mechanisms underlie emotion perception. And you can think of it in terms of like two mechanisms, internal mechanisms and external mechanisms. So an internally focused perception of emotion is when you connect kind of through stimulation with someone through, for example, it's called emotional contagion. And so you just kind of experience what the person might be experiencing. But then there's another kind of perception that occurs when you think about it more cognitively and you label, for example, what you feel with a cognitive label like fear, sadness, happiness. And so the literature has shown that ASC, autism spectrum condition individuals, tend to rely more heavily on these internally focused arousal ways of connecting emotionally than on the externally focused language systems. And that is in line with kind of deficits of theory of mind and cognitive attribution deficits. But what really gets the point across is that the deficits in emotion recognition have kind of a variety of mechanisms to consider, which involves not just the experience of the emotion directly in itself, but also in the articulation or the attribution of emotional states like fear, surprise, sadness, and anger. So the question that I have to think about is how do I want to study emotion and to get an understanding of a particular mechanism? And I've chosen to focus on the internal mechanism because by focusing on external, there's a lot of other factors like cognitive attribution that are in play. So next question is kind of how do you measure emotion? How is it operationally defined? And there, in the past studies, usually what's done is a categorical measurement of emotion, and that is looking at, I'm wondering, is this a laser? Yeah. Or it is, okay, so press this. Okay, so usually people will be presented with different types of faces, and they will represent categories of emotion. For example, like this one is happy, and that one would be like anger. And so you measure kind of how people perceive emotions by having them match the words to a facial expression. But my research is going to look at continuous data through the arousal and valence scales. And what this is it has the participants evaluate two different scales. So one scale is the level of unpleasantness of an emotion and then the pleasantness. And then the other scale is the arousal, and that is the level of like intensity or excitement that emotion portrays. And then what you do is you can combine them, and then you have a wide variety of emotions, not just like the basic 6 categories, but you have a whole variety that can be encompassed, like serene, relaxed, depressed, stressed, tense. And this is really useful because it gives you kind of a numerical way to go about measuring emotions, not just categorical, well, it's categories. You have kind of ratings that you can go off. It's a continuous scale. And so the data which data is best should be used to study the internal mechanism would be this kind of a scale, because your internal experience isn't really something that you would label, isn't something that you would put into categories. Okay. This clicker doesn't like me. Okay. So the next question I had to ask is, well, looking at the literature in terms of autism, is the emotion deficits present in autism a general emotion deficit, or are they something that might be different in different modalities, like music versus speech versus faces. And my hypothesis is that it might be stronger in music and also possibly speech because of a internally focused system that music and speech tend to produce more than just a visual image. And so what has the literature shown? The literature in music says that it seems like there aren't, that ASC individuals and TD, which is typically developing individuals, tend to have very similar responses to music when measuring their galvanic skin responses. But the results are mixed, and it's not completely clear. But it seems to be that, and from our anecdotal experience of interacting with people with autism, it seems that they're more sensitive or have a greater affinity to music and musical experiences. Then in speech and faces, the results are mixed. So some studies suggest that the autistic individuals are sensitive to prosody, which is inflection and the emotional content that's given off through inflection in voice and stress, but not when asked to label categorical emotions. And a majority of studies show that they do have deficits in using prosodic cues to recognize emotions. And in faces, behavioral and neuroimaging studies suggest that ASC individuals have deficits in facial emotion recognition, but again, the results are mixed. So I started thinking, why do we have mixed results, and how can this study possibly elucidate what's going on? And what I think is one cause is that most of the studies do use categorical data, and so they're using matching conditions and using the categories, not using an arousal valence spectrum. So it's hard to really distinguish finely differences that might occur. And so this study hopes to do that, and not only hopes to do that, but hopes to compare directly between different modalities of music, speech, and faces. Okay. So the hypothesis is that the similarity of ASC and typically developing responses to emotional music, speech, and faces will increase in the order of like faces and speech and music. So music would show the highest similarity between those two groups, and that would be because music and speech have greater increasing internal mechanisms that are involved, which are what the ASC individuals usually tend to rely more on, and basically there's a more emotional contagion that happens than a cognitive attribution. And then how am I going to do that is through continuous data, so the valence arousal scales. Another question that my research poses is kind of just looking at the relationship between music and speech, and the question of which one, is more contagious, or what is the relationship between music and speech. There's a lot of kind of literature, especially in musicology, about the evolutionary basis of music and how whether music came first or whether speech came first, or what the importance of music is. And so, maybe which one has more emotional content. Perhaps the evolutionary basis was in trying to understand our emotions or social interactions. So if music is kind of more contagious than speech, then it supports the hypothesis by Ian Cross, who is my supervisor, that music serves as a kind of relational rather than content-based medium. So a medium that allows us to relate to each other more than get across semantic content, that promotes social cohesion in situations of social uncertainty. And the other hypothesis is kind of, so speech is kind of the most important in terms of emotional relating, and that music, the reason that we connect with music so deeply is because it parallels inflections in speech. And there's even some evolutionary musicologists that propose that music was just kind of auditory cheesecake that was just evolved because of language and doesn't really have any function. But most musicologists don't agree with that at all. Or music and speech might be just share many similarities, and we'll see what the research, what happens with the data, and might elucidate these questions. And so the design is basically, I have two groups of ASC individuals and typically developing individuals. And I'm also going to correlate AQ test scores, which are Autism Spectrum Quotient, a test that measures the extent of autistic-like traits in normal individuals. So everyone here could take this test and you get like a rating. And so even if I were to go among the normal population, which is what I'm planning to start off with, I'd correlate the extent of autistic-like traits to the ratings of valence and arousal. And then in the two groups, I would compare the differences between them. Okay, so the task is, you should take note because I'm going to have you do this task if you have a pen with you. If not, that's okay. But on each screen, you're going to be presented with a music clip, a speech clip, or a picture of a face. And your job is to rate the pleasantness and the arousal of each of those clips. And okay, what's really important is that you want to rate the emotion that is expressed by the face, music, or speech that you see, and not necessarily what you yourself feel. So it's about, like thinking about what the music or face portrays, and not necessarily what you're experiencing. So you're going to rate those on a 9-point scale, on 1 being most unpleasant, 9 being most pleasant, and for arousal, 1 being calm and 9 being most exciting, aroused. Okay, and you know that any level of arousal could be either pleasant or unpleasant. All right, so let's try. So the format that you're going to do on your page is you're just going to write down like A, B, C, and D, and then you're going to have 2 numbers. One is going to be your valence rating, that is arousal rating, and okay. All right. Okay, so you make your 2 ratings on pleasantness and arousal. Okay, and then the next one is the next condition. So that was A, and the next one's going to be B, so face. Okay, and next one's going to be speech clips. So talk more about the stimuli later, because these aren't the final versions. Okay, so those are the stimuli that I'm considering to use, but I'm like grappling with some questions, and I'd appreciate any input you guys might have. First question, I have a lot of questions with stimuli design right now because I'm working on building the stimuli, and one question is kind of what cross-modal between music, speech, faces, categories of emotions should I include? For example, the 6 basic emotions are happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise. But they don't really work for every modality. Like in music, disgust isn't something that's really you can express. And so I'm trying to find across all 3 modes the emotion categories that would be useful to look at. Because even though the participants aren't making emotion category evaluations, I will be looking at kind of those categories in my data analysis and seeing how the ratings compare. And the other thing is just making sure that there's consistency between those 3 conditions. For example, right now the music one is 13 seconds long and the speech ones are like really short. And so I need to think, like I'm thinking I should maybe repeat the speech conditions so that they're 13 seconds or something like that. And but the difficulty is I'm trying to find a validated set of emotion stimuli. So these have been validated sets. It'd be easier if I could create my own, but then I would need to draw on previous studies. And for the speech condition, I was trying to figure out whether I should be using nonverbal or verbal sounds. So one of them you heard, which was the laughing, was the nonverbal one, and then the verbal one was the weird sounding one. But I'm probably not going to use any of those. I think I'm going to. I just actually presented this to my class today, which is and I got feedback. So I think I'm going to be using spoken numbers like 572 or like 584, like in different prosodies, and just have numbers and do it that way. Okay. The other question I'm thinking about is like whether I should include preference ratings, so ratings of like how much participants enjoyed it, because I'm possible collaborations. I think I'm going to do that. I have concerns about the robustness of the correlations, because it's kind of difficult for me to get ethical approval to test clinically diagnosed people with ASC. So if anyone has like suggestions on how to get that going faster, that'd be useful. And then mathematical equations to analyze, to combine the arousal and valence ratings is something I have to be thinking about in the future. So I might need help of mathematicians to help me do that. And I have to give a shout out to Lining Sun. So I'm collaborating with him. He gave his talk on in the special symposium on his face psychometrics study. So me and him are working together to create the platform of this study. So it's going to be online. Right. Okay, so just to conclude, kind of the broad aims of the study are manifold. One is to better understand the mechanism of emotion perception in ASC through different modes of music, speech, and faces. And in particular, to be looking at valence arousal ratings as opposed to just categorical external labels, because that really gets more at a direct experience of emotion. Another goal is to better understand what the study could tell us on the relationship between music and speech, and then also thinking, depending on what the results of the study are, to think about the therapeutic applications and possible interventions that could happen. For example, if music does turn out to be an exception to the emotion deficit, general emotion deficits in autism, then we could possibly kind of use conditioning procedures to pair emotions and music to other domains of emotion. And this happens already in patients with aphasia who can't speak. They pair it's called melodic intonation therapy. So they pair music with language to assist learning of language. Okay. And that's the end, so thank you.
Questions? I'm going to pass this strange mic to you.
Hi, thanks Erika for a very nice talk, and it's a very interesting research topic. So I have several questions, and I don't know where to start with, but one of the things I was thinking about is that, for instance, you might consider the time of response that participants take for the different types of data you have to normalize.
Yeah, we're recording that as well.
Right.
Reaction times. We're not making any hypotheses about it, but we want to see if there might be an interesting information.
Well, it might help you improve the consistency between, if you have concerns about the fact that, reacting to a speech or reacting to a picture can be quite different. Maybe you could find a way to normalize that based on the time of response. And perhaps on more technical terms, could you please elaborate a bit more about the scales you have? Meaning you said it was numerical, a continuous variable. So do you measure an actual average of scores, or is it always like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, so basically what I meant by continuous is that you're making ratings on a scale of 1 to 9, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that is different from categories that are just labels of happy, sad. Yeah.
But sorry, it's just that I had in mind maybe some statistical approaches that might be relevant for your topic. So maybe we can discuss that later.
Oh, that'd be so great. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I apologize in advance. Are you using Max to do the testing?
Max?
Max MSP? No.
No.
Go ask Ian to introduce you to Fernando Bravo in
I
your.
do know- yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
ask
yeah.
him to show you how he has the valence and scales set up in Max, and also ask him to show you. Are you going to use? Are you going to use one of the monitors for people's wrists to track their arousal, so that they don't have to self-report it? You can just detect it.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
The department has a set of these things as well, and so ask
Wow.
ask him to show you how it plugs into Max, and
Okay.
also ask him to show you how you can use MATLAB to analyze the data.
Okay. I should
Or
remember
I can tell you later.
Remember that. That's really useful.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I have a bit of a more musicological question, I guess. To my mind, there's a lot of extra musical context that affects your emotional response to music. What's your take on that? Because
Yeah.
obviously, if you hear something in a concert hall or hear it on a recording in a test setting, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
The other question that's related to that is there are a lot of sort of stylized cues in music that an informed listener can be aware of. And what expectation do you have for the general knowledge about the type of music that they're listening to during this study? Because, I mean, if someone was listening to punk rock, that might mean disgust in certain contexts or with certain cues within that musical genre. There could be ideas musically
Yeah.
that signify disgust.
Yeah.
And there might be other signifiers in classical music that might indicate surprise, but they might not be intrinsic, they might be taught cues. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on
Yeah.
all of that.
Okay, so the first question you were asking about extra musical things that impact music, and that's a really good question. As in, why when you're thinking about why people with autism are responsive to music, you have to think about a lot of different aspects. Maybe the movement involved, not just the sound, and that's something I've been thinking about. It's just that in the framework of this study, I can only go so far and start with just focusing on the aural parts of the music and see if there's any difference in there. But you're definitely correct. There's just so much to, especially, I guess from my perspective and my supervisor's research, like we're really trying to think of music as beyond the Western tradition of performance-based music and participatory music, and so that involves a lot of ritual, movement, interaction that happens. And so there's a lot more to music than just auditory listening part. So it's a really good point. Your second question on
How informed your listeners are you
expecting
to be for
the expectations of cues and things like that. Yeah, so what we are doing is before they take this actual experiment, they're going to be filling kind of a background questionnaire. So they will be saying like what kind of music they listen to. I mean, that's just some information that might help us make sense of the data. But more applicable to that question is the control of stimuli that we're making. So we don't want to be using things that could mean a lot of different, have a lot of different cues. So right now, the clips are all MIDI piano 13-second type things that are all similar like that. And so hopefully that gets rid of some other kinds of cues and coming are what people are used to. Yeah. Yeah. Really good comments. I really appreciate it. Very helpful.